The classic Jewish telegram reads, "Start worrying, details to follow." Kind of sums up 5780 that just concluded. There's been plenty to worry about this past year and plenty of details to follow. In fact, if we'd been put in a coma last year on Rosh Hashanah and been woken up today, we'd think we'd woken up in an entirely different reality. We'd learn about historic wildfires in Australia that resulted in immense destruction and loss of human life and non-human life. On this side of the Pacific, we would see historic wildfires raging up and down the West Coast with horrific air quality all around us. We would hear about months of widespread protests and violence on the streets of America's cities, set off by the cold-blooded murder of yet another person of color. We'd learn about a presidential impeachment and a Senate acquittal, and about an unprecedented reckoning with our country's darkest past. We would see a historic number of storms hitting our mainland, and we'd learn about the rapidly melting great glaciers in Greenland. On the bright side, we would find out that after years of behind-the-scenes cooperation, there is finally now formal diplomatic relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain, with, God willing, many more Arab nations to follow their lead. We would be relieved to know that North Korea has not launched a nuclear warhead on us, and that Iran, as far as we know, hasn't yet obtained a nuclear weapon. Perhaps we'd be weirdly overjoyed to learn that the newest and most far-reaching branch of the United States military has been officially activated: Space Force. And then someone would have to sit down and patiently explain what a novel coronavirus is, why everyone is walking around wearing masks, why taking that cruise vacation, not such a great idea, and why it could be dangerous to hug grandma, and why nearly 200,000 Americans have died from this once-in-a-century pandemic. If we had woken up after a year in a coma, we would find ourselves in a whole new reality and might wonder whether we had somehow stumbled into an episode of The Twilight Zone, or Blade Runner, or 1984, or perhaps even The Walking Dead. Last night, I invited us to find the beauty in the storm of the time we find ourselves in. I encouraged us to fashion roses in the flawed diamonds of our lives. Today, I'd like to invite us to consider how we could see our way out of these seemingly apocalyptic times by focusing on a particular four-letter word. That four-letter word is unpronounceable. It's unpronounceable because it is our holiest name for God. Usually substituted with the word Adonai, Yud-He Vav-He contains within it a curious combination of letters that alert us to the heart of the Jewish concept of divinity. To illustrate that concept, I'd like to call to mind an experience of any one of us who's ever had the pleasure of interacting with a small child of around 9 to 18 months of age. As the baby starts to move of their own accord, usually first crawling, then tentatively standing, walking, and finally running. They delight in being beckoned, arms outstretched by their mom or dad, grandma, grandpa, or other special person. With squeals of delight, little by little, they demonstrate their growing proficiency with locomotion. At first, one step, then a few, and eventually a triumphant run across the room to great applause. Without the parent lovingly beckoning the child to go forward, without the encouragement to take each tentative step, it would be harder for the child to acquire the skills needed to advance. So it is with us. In the unpronounceable four-letter name of God, there is the echo of the divine call to each of us to advance. In the ineffable name of God, there is the encouragement for each of us to forge ahead, step by tentative step, in the progress of humanity. This is because Yud He Vav He is a strange combination of letters that alludes to the name that God reveals to Moses in the burning bush. The scene portrayed in the beautiful tapestry on the ark behind me. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be what I ought to be. The four-letter name for God, Yud He Vav He, reminds us that God is beckoning us like a loving parent, yearning for us to advance, calling to us with a loving whisper to contribute to the progress of humanity and of all creation. Or to use the language of theologians like Rabbi Brad Artson, God is the lure, the invitation to create a better, more just, and more peaceful future. In the Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, we know of the divine mission to be partners in the unfolding of creation. In the earliest stories of our people, we hear the divine call to advance. God calls Abraham and Sarah to Lech Lecha, go forth to a land that God will show them. And in today's Torah reading, which Rabbi Phillips introduced so beautifully, we read of Abraham struggling to discern God's call to him. At first, he hears it as the call to sacrifice his own son, his beloved Isaac. Instead, he comes to understand that God's will for him is not only to preserve the life of his son, but to advance God's plan for all the generations to come. God lures Abraham to this understanding, beckoning him to take the ram instead, the ram whose horn, whose shofar calls us to righteousness, to liberty, and to justice to this very day. Just before the pandemic threw our world upside down, I drove myself up to the Staples Center in LA, not for a basketball game, nor for a rock concert, but instead to stand with thousands of others who had come here from the four corners of the earth to pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I did so in part because I wanted to share the citizenship of my wife, my children, my holy congregation, but also because I wanted to be part of a nation that has historically striven to hear the lure of God beckoning to a more perfect future, a more perfect union, a nation that, in the preamble to its most revered founding document, declared, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A nation whose president once said, after the bitter war that ended the formal institution of slavery, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. A nation whose president saw this country as a shining city on a hill. A nation who reveres the prophetic call of a man whose life was lived and lost for the fight for justice and equality, and who reminded us that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. Yet we know that that arc is not drawn with a smooth line, rather with a jagged one. And we know that there is nothing magical about this bending toward justice. It is, after all, we, the people, who are called to make it so. Like an infant learning to walk, we are beckoned by our Creator, lovingly encouraged to take tentative steps and then bigger and more confident strides towards building a world where God's compassion, love, and justice are manifest for everyone. I'm proud now to be an American Jew because both of these parts of my identity call on me to listen for God's still small voice beckoning us to help build a better world. And in just a few short weeks, I will have the privilege of performing one of the most sacred duties incumbent on an American citizen. Yes, for the first time, I'm scheduled to call in for jury duty. But after that, I will, God willing, perform another sacred duty for the first time. I will vote here in this country that I now can call my own. And I hope you do too. But let me be clear. I'm not urging you to vote for or against any particular candidate for any particular office. What I am suggesting is that when you make your decision, your own individual private decision, you consider this. What would the loving, compassionate, beckoning God want us to do? Or to put it another way, what would a more perfect future want us to do? What would our children and their children and their children want us to do today to help ensure that their lives are healthier, brighter, more just for everyone? On this Rosh Hashanah, may we hear the call of our ineffable God, beckoning us to keep taking those tentative steps towards justice and perfection. And in so doing, may we make 5781 and all our futures less like an episode from the Twilight Zone and more like the hope-filled future God is calling on us to create. And may our next telegram state, details to follow, but relax. You can stop worrying now. Amen.